At my birthday party, I planned to announce my pregnancy. Instead, my boyfriend handed me a gift box. Inside was a note that read, "I'm leaving you, you're useless, and I deserve better." Everyone laughed as he walked away. Our friends looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I just smiled because he didn't know what I can do. 2 months later, he was drunk in front of my house screaming my name and do. 2 months later, he was drunk in front of my house screaming my name. I had been with Nate for a little over 3 years. From the beginning, he was charming, attentive, the kind of guy who made you feel like the only person in the room. He wasn't the type to glance around, searching for someone more interesting to talk to. Things between us moved fast. By our first anniversary, we had already moved in together, renting a tiny but cozy apartment that stretched our budget to its limit. Not exactly the smartest financial decision, but in a city where rent was outrageous no matter what, we figured we might as well take the leap. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it felt stable. We shared the same long-term dreams, eventually buying a house, traveling, and maybe one day starting a family. Nate, however, always placed more importance on appearances than I did. He cared about the car we drove, the restaurants we were seen at, the carefully curated moments on Instagram. I should have paid closer attention to that red flag. But hindsight has a way of making things clearer, doesn't it? Anyway, about 4 months ago, something felt off. I was nauseous most mornings, constantly exhausted. I took a pregnancy test, mostly just to rule it out. We had been careful, just not careful enough. And then, 2 pink lines. I still remember sitting on the bathroom floor, staring at that tiny plastic stick as if the symbols on it were in some foreign language I couldn't decipher. I spent nearly a week processing the reality of it before telling anyone. The first person I confided in was my best friend, Barbara. She showed up to our girls' night with a bottle of wine, and the second I stuck to water, she knew. She asked all the right questions, what I wanted, how Nate might react, the practical stuff like insurance and maternity leave. Her calm, logical approach helped me sort through the storm of thoughts in my head. With Nate, I decided to wait. My birthday was in 3 weeks, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity. We had already planned a small gathering at our apartment with our closest friends, and I imagined how special it would be to share the news with everyone I loved all at once. Looking back, God, what a mistake. The weeks leading up to my birthday were strange. The so-called morning sickness hit me at all hours, and I did my best to hide it from Nate. Not that he noticed. He was preoccupied, coming home later, glued to his phone, more distant than usual. I chalked it up to work stress. My birthday fell on a Saturday. That morning, I stayed busy setting up while Nate went to pick up the cake, a simple errand that somehow took him nearly 3 hours, but whatever. By 6 p.m., our friends started arriving. Barbara and her husband, Aaron and Henry, my cousin Lana, who was in town, and a few others, including Mary, a college friend of mine. The party was going well. Good food, plenty of drinks, sparkling water disguised as vodka soda for me, music, laughter. I planned to share my news after the cake, and I kept catching Barbara's eye across the room. Every now and then, she'd give me a small knowing nod, sending a rush of nervous excitement through me. Around 9 p.m., Nate tapped his glass with a fork, signaling for attention. My heart nearly stopped. Did he know? Was he about to beat me to the punch? He launched into this speech about how special I was, how lucky he felt to have me in his life, his eyes locked on mine the entire time. Then, with a soft smile, he handed me a small, elegantly wrapped box, tied with a silk ribbon. The room fell silent. People shifted forward, phones raised, ready to capture what they probably assumed was a proposal. And for a split second, I thought the same thing. I panicked, wondering if I should still announce the pregnancy if he got down on one knee. I unwrapped the box, my hands slightly trembling. Inside, there was no ring. Just a neatly folded piece of paper. Confused, I opened it. The words on the page burned into my memory, etched there forever. I'm leaving you. You're useless, and I deserve better. Your stuff will be packed by Monday. I looked up at him, expecting, praying, for some sign that this was a cruel joke, but his face had shifted entirely. Gone was the warmth, the admiration. Instead, his expression was cold, detached, almost amused. Then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he said we were over, that it had been fun, but he had outgrown me. And then, he laughed. Nate actually laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a scoff, an actual full-bodied laugh. And for a second, a few people in the room laughed too, assuming this was some elaborate joke we had planned together. But then Nate turned on his heel, walked straight out the front door, and never looked back. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood there, frozen in place, holding that cruel little note, the words of my pregnancy announcement dissolving on my tongue. Our friends glanced between me and the door, waiting for someone, anyone, to shout, "Just kidding." But no one did. Barbara was the first to react. She crossed the room, gently pried the note from my trembling fingers, read it, and muttered under her breath, "That absolute bastard." And just like that, the dam broke. Everyone started talking at once, whispers of shock, outrage, hushed words of sympathy. But me, I just smiled. Not because I wasn't devastated. I was. Not because I wasn't humiliated. I absolutely was. But in that exact moment, I realized something vital. Nate had no idea what was coming for him. He thought he was in control, that he had orchestrated this grand, dramatic exit, a public execution of our relationship where he held all the power. But he didn't know I was carrying his child. He had no clue that 2 weeks earlier, while searching his desk for a stamp, I had stumbled upon his secret credit card statements. He had no idea that I had already seen the messages on his Apple Watch while he was in the shower. Really, he should have set up two-factor authentication. Amateur mistake. And most importantly, he didn't know that I was going to be just fine. Everyone in the room looked at me like I might collapse at any second. They hovered, unsure whether to offer comfort or space. But I didn't need their pity. I even cut the birthday cake Barbara had brought, passing out slices as if I were celebrating something rather than grieving it. Mary, of all people, was the first to leave, mumbling something about feeling sick. The timing was interesting, but don't worry, we'll get to her. The others stayed, offering places to stay, shoulders to cry on, even alibis for murder. Kidding. Mostly. By midnight, everyone had gone except Barbara, who flat out refused to leave. No matter how much I insisted I was fine, she curled up on my couch like a guard dog. And as much as I wanted to pretend I had it together, as soon as the last door clicked shut, I fell apart. The weight of it all, Nate's betrayal, Mary's betrayal, the humiliation, the pregnancy, came crashing down on me at once. Barbara just held me while I sobbed, never offering empty reassurances or cliché platitudes about everything happening for a reason. She just let me grieve. Sometime around 2 a.m., when my tears had finally run dry, I told her about the baby. She didn't even look surprised, just nodded and said she had suspected something was off with me for weeks. Then I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots, credit card charges for hotels, fancy dinners, jewelry that had never made its way to me. Then the texts to M, full of heart emojis and late-night rendezvous. We both knew exactly who M was, especially after Mary's hasty exit from the party. We stayed up until dawn, talking in hushed voices, sifting through options, piecing together a plan. At one point, Barbara asked if I was going to tell Nate about the baby. I didn't even hesitate. "He'll find out eventually," I said, "but on my terms, when I'm ready, not a second before." As for his affair with Mary and his little financial secrets, I wasn't going to stoop to his level with petty revenge, but I would make sure the truth came out. All of it. Barbara studied me for a long moment before shaking her head with something between concern and admiration. "You're scary when you get that look in your eye," she murmured. I just laughed. A real, honest laugh. The first one since I had opened that God-forsaken box. That night, as I lay in bed alone for the first time in years, one hand resting over my still flat stomach, I made 2 promises. One to my unborn child, that no matter what, I would give them a stable, loving home. And one to myself, that I would come out of this stronger than ever before. Nate thought he was delivering the final blow with that cruel little note. But if there's one thing I've learned from all those true crime podcasts I binge while folding laundry, it's that the best revenge requires patience, strategy, and a clear head, all of which I had in spades. Next time, I'll tell you exactly what went down in the days and weeks that followed, including how I found out who, exactly, he left me for. Spoiler alert, it wasn't shocking, and the first cracks in his so-called grand exit plan started showing almost immediately. All right, hey Reddit, Lily here with the promised update. First, thank you for all the support on my last post. It's wild how total strangers on the internet can be more compassionate than people you've known for years, isn't it? So, where was I? Right. The absolute disaster that was my birthday party. Nate had just walked out after publicly humiliating me, leaving me reeling with a pregnancy I hadn't told anyone about. Well, except Barbara. So, let's pick up from the aftermath. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the faint clatter of dishes in my kitchen. Barbara was still there, bless her, acting completely normal while simultaneously checking on me every 5 minutes. She kept nudging me to eat, obviously more concerned about the baby than I could bring myself to be at that moment. I managed a few bites before the nausea kicked in because, of course, morning sickness had impeccable timing. Nate didn't come back that Sunday. Not that I expected him to, which was both a relief and a slow, drawn-out agony. I spent most of the day flipping between numbness, white-hot rage, and this eerie sense of clarity. My mind latched onto logistics. I made lists. A ridiculous number of lists. Financial accounts to untangle, doctor appointments to schedule, people I needed to inform. It was like my brain had thrown up emotional barricades and gone straight into survival mode. Barbara helped me pack up some of Nate's things. Not everything, just enough to send a very clear message that I wasn't sitting around waiting for him to change his mind. Meanwhile, my phone never stopped buzzing. Most of our friends reached out with support, confusion, concern. A few mutual acquaintances clearly just wanted the inside scoop, more interested in drama than my well-being. And then there was the glaring silence. Mary, remember her from the party? The one who suddenly felt sick and left early? Yeah. Then Monday came, and with it, cold, hard reality. I called in sick, something I never do, and made an appointment with my doctor to confirm the pregnancy and talk through my options. Around noon, while I was deep into research on tenant rights, since both our names were on the lease, my phone lit up with a text from Nate. I'll be by at 7 to get my things. Make sure you're not there. The sheer audacity. I stared at that message for a full 5 minutes, my grip tightening around my phone. Then I responded with a single word. Number, no explanation, no negotiation, just a boundary, firm and immovable. He called immediately. I ignored it just as fast. Then I called Barbara, who did what Barbara does best, rallied the troops. By 6:30, my apartment was full. Aaron and Henry showed up. Lana, who had extended her visit, was there. A few other close friends, too. It wasn't a confrontation. It was protection. A wall of people who had my back. Nate arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, and the look on his face when he saw the unexpected welcome committee? Absolutely priceless. He tried to play it cool, tried to act like he had some authority in the situation. What the hell is this? He demanded, puffing up his chest. Aaron, who, mind you, is 6 feet 4 inches and built like a linebacker, handed him a single suitcase. Just the basics. Clothes, essentials, nothing more. In the calmest, most matter-of-fact voice, Aaron told him, "The rest of your stuff will be available when you arrange a proper time and show some basic human decency. But for now, this is all you're getting." Nate's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to me where I sat on the couch, perfectly composed. He opened his mouth, gearing up for one of his classic self-righteous speeches. "This is ridiculous," he started. "Just let me get my—" I finally looked him in the eye and told him, plain and simple, that he should count himself lucky I hadn't changed the locks already. We could discuss the rest of his things once I'd had a little time to process his oh-so-thoughtful birthday surprise. He opened his mouth to argue, but something in my face must have warned him not to push it. He grabbed the suitcase and left, though not before muttering something under his breath about how I always needed an audience. Funny, coming from the man who had dumped me in front of all our friends, don't you think? Once he was gone, I cried again. Not for him, but for the future I thought we'd have. For the life I had envisioned, now reduced to scraps. For the child who deserved better than a father capable of such cruelty. The next morning, I called a locksmith and had the locks changed. Then came Mary. My suspicions had been simmering ever since she bolted from the party, but I needed proof, and it came from a source I hadn't expected. On Tuesday evening, Henry texted me. He told me Nate and Mary had been seeing each other. He and Aaron had spotted them together 2 months ago, but at the time they weren't sure if anything was actually happening. He apologized for not telling me sooner. The words hit me like a gut punch, painful but also weirdly validating. I had known Nate was cheating. I just hadn't known who with. Discovering it was Mary, someone who had sat at my table, shared my meals, accepted my friendship. That was a betrayal in a league of its own. But instead of confronting either of them, I decided to wait, to watch, to gather information. Maybe I'd been listening to too many true crime podcasts, but patience really is key in situations like this. Over the next week, I focused on the practical things. I officially confirmed my pregnancy, 10 weeks along. I met with a lawyer to discuss the lease and how to handle dividing our assets. Luckily, we weren't married, so at least I was spared the nightmare of divorce. I froze our joint credit card, opened a new bank account in my name only. Basic self-protection. What I didn't do was tell anyone but Barbara about the pregnancy. Not yet. This wasn't denial, it was strategy. I needed to get my affairs in order first. 2 weeks after the disaster of my birthday, Nate texted. He wanted to talk things through and pick up more of his stuff. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near our apartment. Public place, broad daylight, my terms. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked awful. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing a wrinkled shirt like he'd slept in it. A small, petty part of me took satisfaction in that. He wasted no time launching into what I can only describe as a half-hearted attempt at an explanation. He'd been unhappy for a while, felt stuck, thought a clean break would be easier for everyone. I let him ramble for a bit before I tilted my head and asked, "Is Mary making you happy?" The way his face froze. Priceless. Pure deer in the headlights panic. He stammered through weak denials, so transparent I almost laughed. I cut him off. I told him I knew everything. About Mary, about the hotel charges on his secret credit card, about the jewelry he had bought her with money we supposedly needed for rent. Then I looked him dead in the eye and told him to be honest, just for once. The fight drained out of him. He sagged like a balloon with a slow leak. He started to say something pathetic, but I shut it down. I told him what mattered now is that he could pick up the rest of his stuff that Saturday at 2 p.m. Aaron would be there to supervise. And after that, I didn't want to hear from him unless it was through my lawyer. His voice actually squeaked when he repeated the word lawyer. He insisted there was no need for that we could figure things out between us. I stayed calm, even as my pulse pounded in my ears. I told him we were beyond that now, that he had made his choice, loud and clear, at my birthday party, and I was simply honoring it. As I stood to leave, he grabbed my wrist, not forcefully, but with a desperate kind of grip. His voice was tight when he asked about the apartment, about how I was planning to afford it on my own. He reminded me that my job barely covered half the rent. And in that moment, everything clicked into place. The real reason behind this meeting had nothing to do with closure or retrieving his belongings. It was about money. What Nate either didn't know or conveniently chose to ignore was the fact that I had been covering more than half the rent for the past year. His finances had been unraveling, his job situation far shakier than he ever admitted. Meanwhile, he had been living far beyond his actual means, using my steady paycheck as a cushion while continuing to present himself to our friends, and apparently to Mary, as the one who had everything under control. I met his gaze with a sweet smile and assured him I'd be just fine, adding, "Unlike some people, I actually know how to save money instead of blowing it all on hotel rooms and jewelry." His face lost all color. In that instant, he knew. I knew everything. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not because I had won some kind of battle, but because, for the first time, I saw Nate for exactly who he was. A man who prioritized perception over reality, who spun lies to seem more successful than he actually was, who walked away the moment I no longer fit the image he wanted to project. When Saturday arrived, just as we had arranged, Aaron was there to supervise while Nate gathered the rest of his things. I made myself scarce, opting to spend the day at a prenatal yoga class, highly recommend, by the way, if you ever find yourself pregnant and in desperate need of stress relief. When I got home, the apartment felt emptier, but somehow it finally felt like mine. That evening, I started rearranging furniture, reclaiming the space as my own. Over the next few weeks, I settled into a new rhythm: work, doctor's appointments, prenatal vitamins, careful budgeting. I wasn't just scraping by, I was building something. The future I had once envisioned had changed, but it wasn't necessarily worse. As for Nate and Mary, well, their picture-perfect romance wasn't exactly thriving. Word traveled as it always does. Through Henry, who heard from his cousin, who worked at the restaurant where they were known to argue in public. I learned that Mary was growing increasingly disillusioned with her so-called prize. Turns out Nate had sold her the same fantasy he had fed everyone else, that he was financially secure, independent, successful. And of course, it was only a matter of time before reality shattered that illusion. The first real crack appeared about a month after our coffee shop encounter. I was at the grocery store, carefully comparing prices on prenatal vitamins, when I turned a corner and literally bumped carts with Mary. Her expression flickered through a series of emotions: startled, guilty, then something close to defiance. She greeted me awkwardly, commenting that I looked good. I tilted my head, studying her, then simply replied, "You look tired." Because she did. That same weary, stressed expression I had seen on Nate's face at the coffee shop now lingered on hers. A silence stretched between us before she suddenly blurted out that Nate had told her we were already separated when they started seeing each other. That, according to him, our relationship had been dead for a while, and we were only still living together to finish out the lease. I arched an eyebrow but said nothing. She fumbled through what might have been a justification or an apology, maybe both, insisting she wouldn't have gotten involved if she had known the full truth. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before finally telling her, "It doesn't matter now. He's yours. Enjoy." I turned to leave, but she called after me. "He's not what I thought he was," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "He promised things he couldn't deliver." I glanced back at her. This woman I had once called a friend, now standing in front of me, hollowed out by her own choices. That sounded like a personal problem, and it was one I had no intention of solving for her. About 6 weeks after the disaster of a birthday party, my body finally started showing. Just the smallest curve of a bump, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. It felt like the right time to be more open about my pregnancy. The first person I told was my boss, who, to my relief, was incredibly supportive, even offering me flexible hours for my third trimester. Little by little, I began to share the news with my close friends and family. Word spread quickly, as it always does in social circles. I knew it was only a matter of time before Nate found out, but I wasn't hiding anymore. This baby was coming, with or without him. 7 weeks after our breakup, as I entered my 17th week of pregnancy, my phone lit up with a series of increasingly frantic texts from Nate. "Is it true? Are you pregnant? Why didn't you tell me? We need to talk immediately. Answer your phone, Lily. This involves me too." I didn't reply, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say yet. I needed time to process what his reappearance in this situation meant, whether I even wanted him involved. The messages kept coming, turning more desperate. "I have rights, you know. You can't keep my child from me. Call me back or I'm coming over." That last one finally made me respond. I told him in no uncertain terms that he was not to show up at my apartment uninvited, that if he did, I wouldn't hesitate to call the police. I also made it clear that I would reach out when I was ready to have a civil discussion. He backed off for exactly 2 days. Then, as the title of my original post hinted, he showed up. It was just past 11 p.m. I was in bed, flipping through a pregnancy book, jotting down notes when I heard it. A car door slamming, footsteps crunching along the path to my front door, and then pounding, not knocking, pounding. Then his voice, slurred but unmistakable. "Lily, open the door. I know you're in there. We need to talk about our baby." For a moment, I just sat frozen, my heart hammering. Call the police? Call Aaron? Pretend I wasn't home and hope he'd leave? Then I heard something that made the decision for me. Crying. Nate was outside my door, drunk and sobbing, swinging wildly between demands and pleas. He kept saying he'd made a mistake, begging me to let him in, insisting this was his baby too. And despite everything, despite the way he had humiliated me, discarded me, treated me like nothing, some part of me felt, not sympathy exactly, more like recognition, the realization that the new life he had envisioned for himself, his grand exit, his fresh start with Mary, his freedom from useless me, hadn't turned out the way he thought. Reality had caught up to him, and now it had a face. A baby he never planned for. A future full of responsibilities he wasn't ready for. I got out of bed, pulled on a robe, and walked to the door. I didn't open it, but I spoke through it, keeping my voice steady. I told him he was drunk, that he needed to go home, that we could talk tomorrow when he was sober. He shouted that he needed to see me now, that he needed proof. Was it true? Were we really having a baby? I took a breath and answered through the closed door. Yes, Nate, I'm pregnant, 18 weeks, and yes, it's yours. But this isn't the way to— A loud thud interrupted me. His forehead or his fist, I wasn't sure, hitting the door. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, he muttered, "Mary left me." He went on, barely audible. She said he wasn't who she thought he was, that he had lied about everything. I couldn't stop myself from responding. Sounds familiar? He let out a hollow, humorless laugh. Then, softer now, he admitted he had messed up. Badly. He begged me to let him in, swearing he just wanted to talk. I closed my eyes, pressing a protective hand over my small bump. Not tonight, Nate, but if you really want to talk, meet me tomorrow at the cafe on Main Street, 10 a.m. If you're late, if you show up drunk, don't bother. That's it. No more chances. There was a long silence. For a second, I thought he might have passed out against my door. Then finally he said, "Tomorrow. 10 a.m., I'll be there." His footsteps staggered away. A car engine rumbled to life, not his, thankfully. He had called for a ride, a small mercy. Climbing back into bed, I reached for my phone and saw a new text from him. "I'm sorry for everything, for the party, for the note, for tonight. I'll make it right somehow." I didn't respond. Words were easy. Nate had always been good with words. But I needed actions now, especially with a baby on the way. Did I still love him? Number that love had died the night he humiliated me in front of our friends. Did I hate him? Not anymore. Hate took energy I didn't have to spare. I would meet him tomorrow. I would listen. I would set my boundaries. And I would decide. Not based on what he wanted, not based on what he suddenly felt entitled to, but on what was best for me and my child. Second update. Hey Reddit, sorry for the wait. Life has been interesting. So, where did we leave off? Oh, right. Nate showing up drunk at my place after learning about the baby. I had agreed to meet him at the cafe the next morning, though honestly, I wasn't sure he'd show. But at 9:55 a.m., there he was. And to put it bluntly, he looked like absolute hell. Bloodshot eyes, same clothes as the night before, a jittery, restless energy that made his leg bounce under the table so hard it actually shook. The first thing I noticed? He had already ordered me a decaf latte. Thoughtful, I guess. Except I had switched to herbal tea weeks ago because coffee made me nauseous. Small detail, but it summed up so much about Nate, always making assumptions about what I needed, never actually paying attention. Anyway, that meeting was a lot. He started with apologies, lots of them. Apologizing for the birthday fiasco, for cheating, for lying about money, for showing up drunk. It felt like watching someone frantically check boxes on a ways I've screwed up list. I took a slow sip of my tea, the one I'd ordered to replace the latte I didn't want, and let him talk himself in circles. There's a strange kind of power in staying silent when someone expects you to react, you know? Just sitting there, letting them run out of things to say. And when he finally did, I asked the only question that actually mattered. What did he want? He looked caught off guard, as if he hadn't expected me to be so direct. Then came the stumbling, the vague talk about wanting to be involved, wanting to do the right thing, and this part actually made me laugh, maybe even trying again. Not in a cruel way, just out of pure shock that he thought reconciliation was an option. But the conversation got real when I laid out exactly how things would go from here on out. I told him I had already spoken to a lawyer about child support and custody. His face when I brought up the lawyer again, priceless. It was like watching someone slowly realize they weren't just dipping their toes into the water, but were already in way over their head. I made it clear I wasn't shutting him out of our child's life, but trust had to be rebuilt from the ground up. That meant scheduled visits, financial responsibility, and proving he could be consistent, not just showing up when it suited him or looked good on social media. But he kept trying to steer the conversation back to us, to what we had been, to whether there was any chance of fixing it. And I kept redirecting him back to what actually mattered, our child. Eventually, he grew frustrated, accusing me of being cold and calculating. I simply reminded him that cold and calculating was exactly what his birthday note had been. The difference? I was being cold and calculating to protect our child. He had done it to protect his own ego. That shut him up. Before I left, I handed him a folder. Inside were ultrasound pictures, my due date, doctor information, and the paperwork my lawyer had drawn up regarding child support. I told him to look it over, consult his own lawyer if he wanted, and get back to me once he'd had time to think things through. As I stood to leave, he grabbed my wrist. Seriously, what is it with men and wrist grabbing? And asked if Mary knew about the baby. I told him that wasn't my news to share, but that I hadn't gone out of my way to tell her. Then I gently pried his fingers off my arm and walked out. The next few weeks were quieter. I focused on preparing for the baby, which mostly meant converting half of my bedroom into a makeshift nursery. Barbara and I spent 3 hours wrestling with an IKEA crib that she kept reorganizing my kitchen because apparently my system makes zero sense to her. But seriously, who in their right mind stores colanders with the pots instead of with the strainers? That's just chaos. As for Nate, he's been surprisingly there. Not in a let's be a family way, but in a structured show up on schedule kind of way. He visits 3 times a week, sometimes bringing useful things like diapers or takeout. Other times, he shows up with completely impractical but admittedly adorable baby outfits. Last week, it was a tiny leather jacket for a 6-week-old. I didn't have the heart to tell him she'd outgrow it before the weather was even cool enough to wear it. Our co-parenting relationship is still a work in progress. There are moments of tension, times when he shows up late or cancels at the last minute because of work. But then there are moments where things feel almost normal. Like the time he noticed I was struggling with a clogged milk duct and, to my complete shock, actually researched remedies. He showed up with cabbage leaves and a heating pad, looking almost proud of himself. If you know, you know. Financially, things have settled into something manageable. So far, Nate pays his child support on time, and I've been able to make things work by doing part-time social media management from home. I'm not rolling in cash, but I'm keeping the lights on. My landlord even let me renew the lease in just my name without any hassle, which felt like a tiny but meaningful victory. The apartment looks completely different now. Nate's things are long gone, replaced by baby gear that somehow takes up twice as much space. I repainted the living room this soft sage green, and every time I see it, I feel a little lighter. It's wild how much your environment can affect your mood. I still run into Mary every now and then. Our city isn't big enough to avoid it forever. It's less awkward now, more like bumping into someone you barely remember from college instead of the woman who helped blow up your life. Last time I saw her, she was with some bearded guy who kept calling her babe every few seconds. She looked happy, or at least like she was trying to be. I genuinely hope she is. Nate, on the other hand, hasn't had the smoothest transition. His new job isn't going great, according to Barbara, who heard it from Aaron, who plays basketball with one of Nate's coworkers. You gotta love the way gossip travels in small cities. He moved into some depressing little studio apartment and complains about it constantly. Sometimes when he comes to pick up Zoe, I catch him looking around my place, his expression hard to decipher. Nostalgia, maybe a little regret. But the weirdest thing by far has been this sudden, personal growth phase he's going through. Apparently, he's been seeing a therapist. This is the same man who once told me therapy was just paying someone to listen to you whine. He's reading parenting books, joined some dad group on Facebook. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if aliens abducted the real Nate and left some reformed version in his place. Meanwhile, my own life has taken a few unexpected turns. Remember how I mentioned working from home part-time? That actually came through Henry. He recommended me to his sister's company. The work is engaging, the people are great, and best of all, I can do it while Zoe naps. When she decides napping is part of her schedule, that is. And then there's Eli. Yes, there's an Eli now. He was the grocery delivery guy who kept bringing my orders during those chaotic early postpartum weeks. At first, he barely registered as anything beyond a voice saying, "Here you go," while I waved him off with a half-asleep, "Thanks, just leave them by the door." But then, little things started happening. Notes tucked into the bags, recommendations for snacks other new parents swore by, or the occasional dad joke that made me laugh out loud despite my exhaustion. One day, when I was particularly overwhelmed, hadn't showered in 3 days, pretty sure I had spit up in my hair, he dropped off my order and hesitated. Then he asked, "Need help carrying those water cases inside?" For a second, I hesitated too. Strange man in my apartment, but something about him felt safe. He helped put away the groceries, chatting easily about his own life. Turns out he has a younger sister with 2 kids, and he helps out with them all the time. That explained why he didn't seem fazed by my disaster of an apartment. Before he left, we exchanged numbers, just in case there were any issues with future deliveries. We both knew that was complete nonsense, but neither of us called it out. Since then, we've been texting. He's stopped by for coffee a couple of times. It's nothing serious. I'm in no rush to dive into another relationship, but it's refreshing to talk to an adult who isn't interested in diaper brands or sleep training methods. Last week, Nate came by for his scheduled visit with Zoe. Just as he arrived, Eli was leaving. The look on Nate's face was complicated. Later, as if it was an afterthought, he casually asked, "Who was that guy?" I kept my answer vague, partly because there's not much to tell yet, and partly because, well, it's really none of his business. He made a few offhand remarks about moving on quickly, then seemed to catch himself and backed off. Barbara insists I should give Eli a chance, but I'm taking things one step at a time. After everything I've been through, I know better than to rush headfirst into something new. Besides, Zoe is my main focus right now. Dating as a single mom is an entirely different game, and I'm still figuring out the rules as I go. Speaking of Barbara, she's been my rock through all of this. On the days when exhaustion swallows me whole, and I'm convinced I'm failing at this whole motherhood thing, she shows up with an iced coffee, the first love of my life, finally back in the rotation now that breastfeeding is getting easier, and reminds me that every new parent feels like they're drowning sometimes. She takes Zoe for a few hours so I can shower, nap, or just sit in absolute silence, staring at the wall like it's a portal to another dimension. Yesterday was my birthday. Exactly 1 year since the night that changed everything. Instead of letting that memory weigh me down, I had a small get-together at my place. Barbara and her husband were there, along with Aaron and Henry, my cousin Lana, and a handful of other close friends. Nate stopped by briefly to drop off a gift, a surprisingly thoughtful bracelet with Zoe's birthstone, but he didn't stay. As I looked around my tiny apartment, filled with people who genuinely love me, at my daughter sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, at the life I've slowly built from the ruins of what I once thought I wanted, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. I have no idea what the future holds. Maybe Eli will become something real, or maybe he'll just be a kind, fleeting chapter in this story. Maybe Nate will keep working toward being a decent co-parent, or maybe he'll fall back into his old ways. Maybe I'll stay in this apartment forever, or maybe one day I'll find a home with a backyard where Zoe can run and play. What I do know is that I am not the same woman who stood holding that note on her birthday last year. That woman was broken, but determined. This woman is whole, stronger in the places that once shattered. So if there's any lesson to take from this messy, winding journey, it's that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the thing that pushes you toward the best version of yourself. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. P.S. If you're wondering what became of the enormous teddy bear Nate brought to the hospital, it's currently serving as a barricade to keep Zoe from rolling off my bed when I need 2 seconds to use the bathroom. So I guess it found its purpose after all. For those curious about the infamous breakup note, I kept it. It's tucked away in a memory box in Zoe's closet, alongside her hospital bracelet, the first curl of her hair, and the pregnancy test that started it all. One day when she's old enough, we'll tell her the full story. Not to burden her with it, but because it's part of where she came from too.